All right, music fans, welcome. Harmless Me here again, talking real music in real time for a couple of real people out there just like you and just like me. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being one of the select few that are still able to watch these videos or want to watch them. Here's Mecca. This is amazing. The album's called Everlasting. Came out, I don't know, a couple months ago. And this is the way you do AOR, okay? Joe Vanna, who is the mastermind behind Mecca, and this isn't his first go-round with Mecca, so you can probably search out some other music by Joe and his merry band of great musical prodigies here. I don't know. It's the kind of music that should be on the radio. It isn't. If you're a fan of Toto and Survivor and Foreigner and anything that kind of sounds like that sort of stuff, and Mecca just sounding like Mecca. All right, so there you have it. A true original, Joe Vanna and his project called Mecca. Now, another true original, Glenn Hughes, is out there talking about how he was almost the singer of Van Halen. Holy crap, Batman. That makes no sense to me, but in a recent article, he confirms. Now, this is kind of weird wording here, so I'm just telling it like it's written here. He confirms that Eddie Van Halen nearly asked him to sing for Van Halen. And then he goes on to say, would it have worked? I'm not sure. Now, before we go into the meat and potatoes here, can you picture Glenn Hughes singing Jump or Panama, really anything off of 1984? I can't hear him singing that stuff. And quite honestly, I don't think this would have been a good idea. Ed was a huge fan of Deep Purple, and apparently he loved the Glenn Hughes era of Deep Purple. Anyway, in a recent podcast, legendary Deep Purple vocalist and bassist Glenn Hughes confirmed that Eddie Van Halen nearly asked him to join Van Halen back when the Southern California rock act was looking for a new singer nearly 4 decades ago following the departure of David Lee Roth. Okay, so instead of Hagar, it would have been Hughes. That's just Van Hughes. You call it Van Hughes, right? Actually, that sounds okay. Like Van Heusen. It would have been Van Hughes. Eddie was newly sober at the time, according to Glenn Hughes. I had no idea Eddie had been a friend of mine from the beginning. Those were 2 separate sentences, by the way. He says, look, wow, would it have worked? I'm not sure. That's fairly optimistic to say, I'm not sure. I'm saying no. I mean, Sammy was the right choice. Sammy was the right choice. And people were freaked out about Sammy. He says here, Glenn, unless I was completely sober, and I've been sober for 24 years now. So that's more recent than what he says about Eddie Van Halen at the time. And I never heard that Eddie Van Halen got sober after David Lee Roth left the band, especially considering what Sammy Hagar has said about Eddie Van Halen over the years. Glenn previously mentioned the hypothetical Van Halen collaboration in an interview back in 1996 with a journalist by the name of Mike Erickson. Reflecting on some of the bands that have asked him to join in the past, Hughes said, Eddie Van Halen told me, this was way back then, he said to me that when they were auditioning Sammy Hagar, that if I would have been clean and sober, I would have gotten the gig. Wow. Well, that would have been crazy and interesting. Sammy, when he took over, obviously he didn't sing a lot of the Dave material. And of course, fans were disappointed or had mixed feelings about that. I can't see Glenn Hughes fitting in. I get the fact that he's a great singer. Even to this day, Glenn Hughes can bring it. he just had a stint with the Dead Daisies, and some of their material with Glenn was very impressive. He's a great singer, a great musician, and again, one of those guys who should get a lot of recognition because he was very influential, and he continues to be a force of nature out there. But the idea of Glenn Hughes singing for Van Halen is just weird to me. I mean, there's a very progressive side to Glenn Hughes. He's a little different, he's not quite mainstream. And maybe that's where Ed wanted to go after all of the vaudevillian, goofy, cartoon-like stuff with Dave. Maybe he wanted to just blow it up and do something different. And I think he achieved that with Sammy. But again, Sammy was into making pretty straightforward melodic rock music himself. So it wasn't as much of a shock as Glenn Hughes would have been. So again, add another singer to the list of people. I was just talking about Mitch Malloy a little while ago. And again, Mitch would have been a pretty decent fit for Van Halen, whereas Glenn Hughes would have been kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. And you know what? Back in those days, I think people may have been fairly tolerant of that to some degree. But you go from being like a top 40 band after 1984, and you would have been exclusively a rock radio band. I mean, people would have been listening, but not on certain radio stations, because there's no way Van Halen's going to make a pop single with Glenn Hughes as your singer. I just don't. I don't hear it. I don't see it. And but it's, again, this is interesting stuff when you learn about someone who was, hinted at as the singer, and apparently sobriety was the key factor as to why he didn't get the gig. All right, so that's it. More interesting and somewhat useless information for people out there. Here's Mecca, Everlasting. This is not useless. This is the kind of music you put in and you listen from start to finish, and you love it and you enjoy it, much like when you turn on Modern Retro Radio, modernretrofm.com. Go listen. You can listen for hours on end and not be bored, because it's not your dad's FM radio station, okay? It might be your grandfather's FM radio station at this point, but it's not your dad's. So there you have it, folks. Please support the channel here, which means you got to subscribe, watch the videos, go over to Patreon. I'm getting more patrons because they understand that my revenue has peaked, okay? I had peak revenue, kind of like peak oil. I'm running out of revenue, okay? There's more oil than there is YouTube revenue for me. So again, if you like what I do cover other topics on this channel, and then I have another channel that you can check out as well. Brand new channel where it's strictly non-music stuff, and some of it's a little edgy and a little out there for the people that come over here. So I get it, but I will be bringing some of those issues over here as well. So just running out of stuff to talk about, really. This was an interesting story, though. Glenn Hughes singing for Van Halen. Didn't see that one coming. Didn't see it. All right. See you soon.